Hello, welcome back to the Transfer Flow podcast. And on today's episode, Manchester City are in crisis. Is it just injuries or is there something else going on under the hood? Inter versus Napoli. Who are the favourites for the Italian title? And how insane is this title race? And Chelsea versus Arsenal. Should they be thinking optimistically about the teams above them or pessimistically about the teams below? That's all on today's episode. So, Ted, we're back for another episode. I'm Patrick Van Straten. You are Ted Knutson. It's good to see you. How are you?
I'm all right. I'm praising baby Jesus. That we got a little bit of break going in the international. Need to heal up. A little bit of rest. Man, these teams are just suffering right now, and obviously the team that we're going to talk about at the top of this is suffering the most. But there are teams that are desperate for a little bit of a breather, and this international break came at exactly the right time.
Well, look, I'm happy to have a breather coming up too. I'm away on holiday, and look, I'm a veteran at this point. I'm 35, so I'm basically too old to play any professional sport, it turns out. Manchester City, also in need of a little bit of a break. I don't know if you've heard this, Ted, but they've actually lost several games in a row. Have you read this anywhere? Have you heard anyone mention this at all?
Has it been 4 games in a row that they've lost?
It's been 4.
Has Pep ever lost a 5th game in a row?
I understand he hasn't.
There's a first time for everything.
And I mean, it's a genuine crisis for Manchester City in that they've let a lead slip in the last 2, which everybody hates. And also, I guess it's kind of unusual when you think about the way that City play. Generally, you know, they shouldn't need to be particularly open after they go a goal up. But
usually what happens with City is that they will get the second goal and then they will lock things down and they'll pass it around. And like anytime the City's up 2-0, it's just like the most boring football you could watch, like historically anyway. And that's because they're just really bleeding the game. They're making the opposition run from place to place. It's usually pretty tight. This year, it is not. And this year, like their inability to sort of take the lead and get the second one and keep it in control, or quite simply, the ability to sit on a lead has seemed to have left them. And there are reasons for this, and we can kind of dig into it. But I think that it's a little bit endemic of the fact that they are older and that squad has injuries, but it also doesn't have like the fresh legs of youth throughout it now. It doesn't have like sort of a bunch of peak age players that they can kind of rotate in. They have a lot of sort of young players. They have a small amount. They have a lot of slightly older players that are kind of at the end of their sort of elite status. And particularly in that midfield, like you saw it come to bite against Brighton. And you know, I did a recap today on the newsletter, thetransferflow.com/subscribe if you want to get that daily in your inbox. But the recap was mostly about Hertzler making a big adjustment at halftime, a big tactical adjustment, brought on Baliba at halftime, and then shortly thereafter brought on Matt O'Reilly for, I think, his first goal, but one of his first starts in the Premier League after a summertime move. He's an attacking, creative, shooting type midfielder, and they got rid of Hinchelwood there. And it really changed the game because, like, in the first half, they couldn't even put a glove on City outside of like one single shot. In the second half, City could not keep up with them. I don't know if you watched any of it, but you know it was obviously very frustrating for Brighton fans in the first half, and then the second half, like by the end of it, there was a big party going on.
Yeah, it's interesting what you've said in the light of, you know, City try and get 2 goals and then lock it down, because in this game, it did feel like the aim was, okay, let's go off really, really fast. Let's try and get that lead. And then let's hope that we've kind of got the legs to see it out. And in this game, I think Brighton, did they even have a shot before 34 minutes, somewhere around there?
I think it was 35th minute was like their first shot. It was a good shot. And then they had one more in the first half. So yeah, City were utterly dominant, and they could have had 2 or 3 goals. Like there was one time where Haaland hits the ball so hard and just happened to put it on the outside of the post as opposed to the inside of the post. So that was one. There was another one. I think Savinho had something that was like really close to another great chance too. So it would not have been a shock if like City go up early and then just control and see this game out. But the shock, I think, was more about, one, how big the adjustment was for Brighton in being able to go from a 2-player pivot to a single-player pivot and then like really kind of control that. But then a little bit is about how City's midfield legs have a 30-year-old Kovacic, who actually was their best creative passer in the first half, but is supposed to be the deep lying midfielder. You've got a 34-year-old Gundogan whose health is sometimes a little bit rocky, and you have to sort of maintain him. And then you have Phil Foden also in midfield, who hasn't seen that much playing time this year compared to before, but is thought of as basically a second striker role and not a full midfield role. So the point here is that Kovacic kind of ran the show in the first half. He did a great job, but then as the adjustment happened, they were running out of legs in that midfield and they got run over. And that was what we saw in the second half. It was still tight, but City kind of deservedly lost the expected goals battle, and it resulted in the fourth straight loss, which is super unusual in Pep's career and also at his time in City.
Yeah, and I mean, to dig into the numbers there, I mean, by the time Brighton had that first shot, City were at something like 2.3 expected goals. And then in the last hour of the match, they added 0.34 expected goals to that total, while Brighton managed to catch up and steam ahead of them. And that Baleba change for Ayari, I mean, in possession winning, but also in creativity, in press resistance, really everything there. Baleba does look like the next kind of 9-figure player coming out of Brighton, apart from maybe João Pedro, which he could be it as well.
We've barely seen him, but it had a huge impact on this game as well. I was talking to somebody actually in football this weekend, or this week when I was on site, and they were talking about how they were super excited to see Pedro, and obviously he hadn't made an impact yet. And then immediately, he's got a goal that was a scrappy little goal, but then an assist on the second one, and again could be another huge transfer. But Carlos Baleba, I think, is kind of one of the big stories of the first couple of months of the season.
Yes,
didn't expect him to be the whirlwind that he is, and no one in the Premier League seems to be able to handle him very well when he's on his game, which is pretty consistently. So, a lot of times you'll see midfielders kind of come and go. It feels like he's mostly been quite good every single time he's been on the pitch.
Yeah, he's a really, really exciting player. I mean, 20 years old. He's not 21 until January. But I think it's really interesting what you're talking about the age curve at City, because obviously there's been discussion of the injuries, but City do have younger players in the team, but they're all around kind of the edges of the pitch, right? So they've got Savio, they've got Doku, even Haaland, but they don't have really fresh legs in the center of the park at all.
And unless you're Spurs, actually having a midfield is pretty important.
Yeah, Spurs don't really care about that,
Indifferent, whatever.
It doesn't matter at all. But this does feel, and I know you said this in the newsletter, but this does feel, for the first time under Pep, like City have to go into the January window and add athleticism while also finding people who can match the insane in-possession demands of a Pep Guardiola team. That is an incredibly steep task for a recruitment team to face, right? They
were risky this summer, and they were risky because they had not churned the squad that they might have done before. So there was a first Pep period and sort of a second Pep period, and you can feel it's kind of a tail end of it. And he might be leaving. I think there's a sense that he probably is. So they kind of let things ride, hoping that, a bit like in his first season, he'd be able to overcome it. In his first season, he had really old fullbacks. And the fact that he had really old fullbacks meant that, they just could not control the game as he had at Bayern. He had to adapt a little bit. He had to adapt the Premier League sort of physicality and pace. And it cost him a title. That was the sort of first time. The second title that he didn't win was the unbelievable one with Klopp, where he'd won the first battle of that one, and then they got the second one went from two teams that basically outperformed almost every single record the Premiers have ever seen. And then this one, it could be a Liverpool one where Arne Slot does it, but it doesn't feel like Liverpool are this juggernaut right now. It just feels like they happen to have the shine of health. They still have some of their very, very elite talents, including Salah, and they're just, in a battle of attrition, Liverpool feel like they're going to win that one, possibly because they have the best attacking depth in the league as well.
Well, and it also feels like the youth players who they've needed to use over the last kind of 18 months look very promising. I mean, Quansah obviously looks fantastic, but Bradley as well, coming in for Trent, I think has acquitted himself fairly well. Whereas
I think Cujo's just this unbelievable unspoken story for the first part of the year. He's been out of this world every single time I see him. And the numbers are good, but not eye popping. But he just ends up being like a problem. And the fact that he's a problem means that Salah gets to have less attention, right? And obviously Diaz also is there. So they're stocked in ways that other teams are. Feels like City kind of right now have Doku is not on fire. Savinho is still kind of trying to find his feet. You could see it, right? You can see him, and he's like so close, but he's not quite made that little bit of leap. And then you've got Haaland. And then Foden hasn't really been on fire either. But I think part of that is like they're just trying to figure out how to control things defensively. Last year, it didn't feel like it felt a little bit like Klopp had given up on that element and just let the dogs run the whole time. And it almost feels like if City did that, then they might end up with better results than they currently have had. But it would take such a huge change in mentality and tactical setup than they've done before that I don't think he's ready to do that yet. For the second half of the year, especially if he didn't get something in January, like maybe they just go high tempo and let the boys run. But, the counterpoint to that is they still want to win a Champions League, and they need to have enough health and enough sort of tightness for the Champions League to be able to walk out of that with a lot of sort of close wins.
Yeah, there's the kind of Rodgers Liverpool plan of this team that you could kind of see where it's just like, we're going to get overrun in midfield. We kind of don't care because our horses are faster than your horses. But at the same time, they've created an awful lot during this losing streak. I think they've scored 3 goals from about 7 XG. Okay, they've given up 8 XG in the last 3 games, which is insane. But when teams are cutting through you when you're trying to have control, then maybe the thing to do is to give up on the idea that you can exert control, at least by making tweaks to the existing system.
That might actually be the story of the first couple of months of this year. Nobody has full control except Liverpool, and even they're a little bit ropey. Like that Liverpool match this weekend was a lot closer than the scoreline looked like. They were so close to giving up a couple of set piece goals. I thought Aston Villa did a great job causing problems on set pieces, and then obviously, anytime you let Salah run and certainly let him run off of like the first pass, like you're gonna get demolished. And that was effectively what happened. It was two mistakes. One, like you could see Salah just being faster than Bailey, which I don't think most people would have predicted in any sort of race there. And you're like, nope, he's not gonna get him. No, he's done. And then Nunez stuck with it. Then there was a very stupid defensive mistake that ended up being a header that was not properly cleared, and then suddenly it's going back the other way. So but I think in general what we're seeing there is Liverpool kind of have control. Everybody else in the entire league, maybe with the exception of Nottingham Forest, although this weekend was bad, has no real actual control. And they're trying to exert different types of it and failing in small to medium ways in every single team.
Yeah. And I mean, the plus side of this is that Liverpool have this commanding lead at the top of the league, but it doesn't feel as unassailable as it would have felt a year or two ago. I mean, like, obviously they got 9 points over Arsenal, so maybe Arsenal are out of it, but maybe. But at the same time, these are not probably teams that are going to give up 20 points over the course of the season. We're looking at maybe teams dropping 30 points over the course of the season, or possibly even more. So that might maybe we're grasping at straws, but we can imagine there being a title race down the stretch.
Well, you can imagine there being a title race because you look at the expected goal differences, and there's just nobody that stands out that's like well above 1, right? Like there's like Liverpool's out there, and these are StatsBomb numbers, but Liverpool's out there at about a 0.7. City are 0.84, Chelsea are 0.48, Arsenal are 0.27, but we know why they're all weird. And then like Spurs are down there in 10th at a 0.72, but part of that 0.72 is like game state related. If you're always a goal down, then you always have to attack. So it's not like you're trying to exert any form of control. And so it's not just us saying this as like, hey, we've seen this type of stuff. It's saying that when we look at historic numbers, none of these teams are exhibiting elite control over the game on the defensive side. Every single team except Liverpool is over 1 expected goal conceded per game, and none of them are like super elite on the attacking side either. So yeah, it's going to be tight. It's going to be a bit variant. City are in a rough patch, and we're not going to count them out for dead. So many people have done that before in sort of this November to January period. But I do think they have to make a move, because when you look at that squad and you look at their ages and how often sort of fatigue injuries are picked up, or how historically some of these guys have an injury history that's going to come back and potentially bite them if you play them a ton, like they got to do something. And if they don't do anything, well, then that's sort of a concession that says that, Pep's probably moving on, and they're going to take their medicine now and then reload for the next person, which is okay. But it would be surprising and slightly unprecedented in the era of having the greatest modern manager to just sort of concede the rest of a season.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see what happens as well, with whether the verdict is handed down on this court case, because you imagine that might affect it if that comes in before January, because they were originally talking about that coming down around Christmas, New Year, I think.
A Christmas gift for everyone else in the league, potentially, or strictly for City fans. We'll see.
I mean, right now, I think Pinnacle has them at 3.25 when you're looking at their title odds for the rest of the year. I mean, that kind of feels like it's maybe worth a flutter. I'd be interested in that. If you're hearing anything interesting about a midfield target for them in January, then maybe you're tempted by that.
So we had kind of two pushes on the preseason stuff for the title outright. One of them was Manchester City versus Arsenal, and I was like, Arsenal not winning the title just felt like it had too much value in it for various reasons. Like they had a good performance, but like things could have gone wrong. They had the good side of most of the injury stuff last year.
Yeah,
it did not end up with any of that so far this year. So it was not Arsenal was part of it, which meant not Arsenal meant that City were probably solid favorites, but then like nobody knows what happens in the court case this year versus past years versus future years and how that's handled. And then the other one was for a while, like Liverpool had good value at like 9-1, and you're like, man, could you have gotten like some Liverpool value at 9-1 for like, 10, 100, 1,000 pounds? I don't know. I think it went off at like 8-1, which was like pretty close to neutral value. But outright markets are always weird in that there's just not as much liquidity in those, and they tend to stay wrong for a much longer period of time. The game by game markets have huge amount of liquidity, and so that's usually the ones that stay optimized.
Oh, interesting. I mean, I think even Liverpool themselves are slightly surprised by this, right? Because I think Alexis McAllister came out this weekend. He said, we didn't think we were going to be in this title race before the season, but who knows? Maybe we are now. This is a huge opportunity for them. When you see City rolling out, Rico Lewis at left back and Simpson Pusey at centre back, I don't
even know who those people are.
Yeah, they're children. That's why they're 19-year-olds, and you don't want to go after them. But you look at Simpson Pusey and you think, this guy's going, 1 for 5 on long ball attempts, winning 1 out of 4 aerial duels. It's
not the level of the best team in the world, which is what City had been up until very, very recently. I know some Arsenal player names that come through the academy. I don't know a lot of others unless like we're in that scouting phase where we're looking for academy kids. And that's actually what a lot of German teams do now. They scout the best of the English academies and just figure out who's ready to make a leap for playing time. But yeah, remember those years with United where like you'd just see dudes get out there and they'd have to play like half a Premier League season and then you'd never see them again. Like it's possible that we're seeing a little bit of that from City right now. But yeah, so I think what we're coming back around to is they have clear needs. They are very, very fragile. And even on a game by game basis, we're seeing that fragility come back to bite them in ways we've never seen really before in this era.
Yeah, it's interesting. And it's interesting as well. Okay, this is maybe a weird time to say this because last week there were a lot of losses for English clubs in the Champions League. But these teams have continued to crush some pretty impressive sides in the Champions League. I mean, even Arsenal losing last week to Inter, I think they outshot Inter 19-7 at the San Siro. It was pretty decent performance.
That match was stupid and frustrating.
It was. But Liverpool absolutely demolishing Leverkusen. I mean, it feels like this is a time where you can be pretty good, get some breaks, and maybe pick up some fairly major silverware.
Yeah, and I think that also when you look around Europe, like everybody's fragile, except maybe Barcelona, who should be, but somehow Hans Flick's out there just making magic happen. So
I don't know what this man is doing. But okay, given what we've been talking about here, title race, also lack of control, maybe should we go to Chelsea and Arsenal before we move over to Serie A?
Okay, so what do you want to say about this game first before we talk about the broader portion of these two teams this season?
What do I want to say about this game first? I thought it was a fairly even game. I thought it shows how desperate Arsenal are that Odegaard came back and immediately played 95 minutes of this match.
And now has been called up to the fucking Norwegian national team for the. I was like, no, just leave the boy alone. I feel like there should be a policy where if you have broken a club player in your last time and they had to then heal up the entire time, you can't immediately call them back up. You have to at least wait one additional window, unless it's like a World Cup or a Euros. You're just banned. If you broke the player, you're banned from like an extra window of calling them back up, and that's where Odegaard is, and that's actually where like the Dutch national team with Van Persie should have been for about 10 years. So,
no, I completely agree. Okay, there's a break it, you bought it element. Okay, so in this game, I think Arsenal did some stuff relatively well here. So Chelsea have been getting a lot of shots off through balls this season. You know, Jackson's been really, really dangerous from those. They didn't get any shots off through balls in this match. That's good stuff. On the other hand, I think they were a little bit lucky there that Palmer didn't maybe do more given the space that Arsenal... I don't know. I think that if Arsenal are going to be this boring, they should be better at being boring. You know, it felt like there was a lot of space between the midfield and the defense at various points in this game.
This felt like when Boldy coached the defense. That's what it felt like when Bold had the defense for a couple of years and they were going to kind of low block with like a bit of havoc causing the midfield above it. And there was always a little bit too much space, but the reason for that was like, they were kind of happy to allow shots from range that, you know, would, you're like, yeah, we'll give a bunch of shots, but they'll all be from range. And so like at the end of the day, like we'll have a better expected goals than our opponents because we will take better chances. Right. And this time it felt like they were giving the shots to the wrong players, and they were doing it from central locations. So like the Neto goal was a break in from central. Nobody really stepped to get to him. Like the one that Palmer had, the Partey was just like, you know, I'm going to let him shoot that. Closing him down seems like a lot of work right now. Feels like Partey's had a lot of those moments throughout the season. Yeah, so I thought that they were playing a fairly dangerous game, but it's not to say that Chelsea weren't like a little bit ropey themselves. Like the expected goals ended up being exactly the same, 13 shots to 17 shots. So Arsenal had 13 and Chelsea had 17. Like there's a lot of happening in this game, but there were just like little moments of quality missing, or you know, the fraction of the offside on the Havertz goal, the slight sort of miscommunication on one of the last shots from the Trossard chance that came about. So like, you know, that is elite football. Like those little moments that go your way or don't go your way. Like that's the difference in being top of the table or struggling along. I think the thing that Arsenal have to figure out coming out of the other side of this, and if health blesses them, then so be it, is how the hell do they start attacking again? Because suffer ball has really killed their ability to put 3 points up. They're getting a lot of one and occasionally losing to the other side of it. But when Arsenal fly, like they are putting up, you know, more than an extra expected goal a game against almost all competition. Not just like the scruffy teams down at the bottom of the table, like a Leicester and stuff like that, but like they're able to do it against everybody. And they have not been able to do that since Mikel sort of decided to lock in and weather the storm here. But they got to dig back out of that and rev the engine back up, because otherwise like they might not make the Champions League if this is the sort of string that continues along.
It reminds me a little bit of, do you remember when Paco Gemes was in charge of Rayo Vallecano?
I do.
And
a couple different stints there.
And that idea that like draws aren't worth that much to us. We need to try and set out and get victories, and Arsenal is certainly at that point now. And at the end of this game, it was almost like they had that realization. And you've got William Saliba like hammering a ball across the 6-yard box in the 96th minute. And have Arsenal just realized they need to do attacking and win games?
Yeah, so let's also just switch that around to Chelsea, which is that I've seen a lot of positive conversations about Maresca and how big of an impact he's had on this Chelsea team. And they're third right now. And they're third by goal difference. There are 4 teams on 19, and Fulham and Newcastle and Aston Villa are on 18. So like it's a pretty tight little table. But Chelsea coming out of the end of the Pochettino era were very clearly at least the 4th best team. Like they were good at the end of last year. So it's not like Maresca's done much to dramatically improve them. And in fact, like, they're only half a goal favorites in expected goal difference. That's like the same as the Lampard era. Now let's be honest. The Lampard era was a little bit vibes, and they were horrible at defending set pieces. And they had a bigger talent edge overall than I think that Chelsea currently do versus the rest of the league. It does help to be able to just have a cup squad and a league squad, so that while everybody else have injury crisis, you have none, except for Reece, who you have to sort of be careful about his minutes, and it's noticeable. But the thing is, like, I don't feel like Chelsea have control either, and I feel like their manager is like just sort of hitting all of the things at all the time to try and like make them have control. They really don't have it. And I think the biggest problem of that is that you don't have a goalkeeper that, that can help them maintain control and possession, which means that suddenly, like a lot of times in their buildup, they're dealing with situations that are suddenly under pressure or problematic. But overall, they have great talent. They have players that can run. They have two players who are two of the best attacking players in the league. But they're not putting up goals like that, and they're not. So like there's this gap between the two things of effectively Chelsea are amazing. Look at what Maresca's doing, and I'm like, Chelsea are fine, but they're not particularly good for like a normal Premier League era. They're just kind of in and amongst the teams where nobody is particularly good right now. That's not a plus. That's a relativism that just says that they're doing better than everybody else because nobody's great.
Yeah, the fact that their expected goal difference per 90 is basically the same as a heavily injured, too conservative Arsenal. It doesn't fill me with excitement. Also, the fact that I think Caicedo has rightly been getting lots of plaudits. He looks excellent in multiple ways this season. But when you have a defensive midfielder who I think is making something like 7 possession adjusted tackles and interceptions per 90 minutes, and yet teams seem to be constantly running unimpeded at your back line, then that does make me think, I think there may be a deeper issue here.
Enzo. So the weirdest part about this whole setup is that Enzo was awesome at the same things that Caicedo is awesome at.
Sure.
And they basically had 2 of them, right? And now when they put Enzo in, like, that's not what seems to be happening. And you're like, how did you break that player that you spent like 90 million on? And I don't think he's broken fundamentally. I think that tactically he's confused. So I suspect that that's an adjustment that needs to happen. Lavia has some injury issues as well, but it's just a weird one. And, you can kind of, when you look from the outside and you've got a lot of experience in the space, you're like, this doesn't quite add up to something that feels like it's awesome. It's not better than the sum of its parts. Yeah. And right now, that's where Chelsea are at. They feel like they're a little bit less than the sum of their parts. Now, the other thing that I find interesting, and also, again, this is a little bit of a Maresca thing, is they're bad at set piece execution right now. And they bought a coach from Brentford in order to help out with that. Like, the only way that should work is if they're not actually training the set pieces that often, and they're not putting in the time on the training pitch. Now, I have no insight into this. I'm nowhere near Cobham these days. Like, I don't even go to visit the women's team because Emma's gone. But I think that these are all things that if I were the owner of these teams and I wanted to drill down a little more into why isn't this quite working as well as it should be, like, it feels like if Chelsea were awesome, like, they would be right there with Liverpool right now. But they're 9 points behind Liverpool right now. So again, that just tells you the difference between they're doing fine in a relative sense in a relatively weak league year, or they're great and they're sort of living up to the sum of their budget and their parts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, given the size of the team and the delivery that they have available to them, you would expect them to be getting way more change out of set pieces. Because when you've got Cole Palmer on the pitch and then you've got either Enzo or Reece James on the pitch, you've got incredible delivery with both feet.
Should.
And yet. Yeah. And yet. Yeah. Should is really the word around Chelsea. Okay. From one insane title race, because I think, well, not insane title race, but very, very tight top of the table in the Premier League, bar Liverpool. To an even more ridiculous one. I've been wanting to talk about Serie A for a while, and this weekend Inter played Napoli. Every week there seems to be a big game in Serie A at the moment.
That's because there's so many teams fighting for the title.
It's crazy. If you haven't looked at the Italian table in a while, honestly, go away and look at it, because right now Napoli are top on 26 points. Then Atalanta, Fiorentina, Inter, and Lazio are all on 25. Then Juve are on 24. Then there's a 6-point drop to AC Milan, who actually have one of the best expected goal differences in the league, which is very funny as well. I mean, it's genuinely crazy, and pretty much any of these teams can beat anyone. And weirdly, the one of all those top sides with the worst expected goal difference per 90 are Napoli, who are top. Do you have any sort of read on this insanity? I'm having a great time watching it, because I do think Serie A is arguably the most entertaining of the men's top leagues in Europe right now.
It's entertaining unless you're watching a Juve match, in which case there's nothing entertaining about it. Like, it's just horrible. Like basically you've taken all the talent and you decided to just like absolutely demolish the game. It's like a bad Jose season during Jose's prime. But no, so I think that Conte is a great head coach, and I've said this for a long time. I also think he's an asshole, and he's super difficult to work with. And like, if he's not getting his way, he will throw his toys out of the pram. So as an organization, it's very difficult to choose to work with Conte. And in fact, like, Napoli decided to make a bunch of moves this summer that we thought were crazy, or they failed to make a move because they decided to overprice the market by a bazillion euros on Osimhen. But that doesn't take away the fact that he's really good. And so, like, that's what you're seeing right now. Now, is he good enough to win this league with this amount of competition? I don't know. Like, it's like an open question, because these other teams have some pretty good coaches. Atalanta, we know, has a very good coach. Inter has one of the Simeone brothers, not Simeone, Inzaghi. Yes, Inzaghi brothers. And sorry, there are all these players that like have sort of, there's a lot of Nepo baby going on.
Yeah, Napoli have a Simeone. Everybody's related to somebody. But
which is very Italian as well.
Yeah, I mean that's really Italian. But I mean, to put this in context, I think there are 8 teams in Serie A who have a positive expected goal difference, and one of those is Bologna, who are barely positive. And there's some absolute dross in that league. There always is. But everybody kind of presses a reasonable amount. Nobody presses super, super hard except for Bologna. The goal difference among these top teams, everybody's between +10 and +16. It feels incredibly finely poised. And you would imagine, or I imagine, that this should, in theory, favour Inter and Juventus, who you would hope have another level to go to. But I'd really hate to make a prediction about this league.
So the thing that Fiorentina are out of nowhere, right? And that's like the most unexpected at the moment. And how sustainable that is an unknown, but it's been a long time since we've seen Viola up in these heights at the moment, or where they're at. Napoli and Juve do not have elite attacking numbers right now. And usually in order to win a league, you got to be sort of at least up about 1.5-ish. They're like 1.1, 1.2. Now, does that mean that they're selling out in order to be defensively sound? Possibly. But does that usually mean that you're also ending up with a lot of draws that cost you a chance of winning the title? Yes, especially in years when you have a lot of competition around you that can spike these higher numbers. So Juventus at the moment have 6 wins and 6 draws and no losses. They're undefeated. Not to say that they're not defeatable, but they're undefeated. And then Napoli are 8-2-2. They've given up 9 goals and 7 goals respectively out of 12 matches. So like they're barely giving anything up. But if you're playing these big games over and over again, you're going to have to come out with some points once in a while, because if somebody else goes on a run, there's the league gone. And I think that's the thing that would worry me the most. And Atalanta seem like the best sort of attacking team. The other team that's there that is lost is coached by an ex-Premier League coach that loved to smoke on the sideline.
Oh, yeah. And they have the best expected goal difference.
He's real good, and nobody ever thinks of Lazio as being good these days. But Sarri has put together, a very robust team that does Sarri things, and he's able to speak to them in a language they all understand. So if you're not watching this and you want something to just, anytime that one of these games is on, like, put it on. Like if you're a football fan, it will be fun and it will be loud, and they'll be like, the ultras are like invested this year in ways that they haven't been recently, except for the Milan ones who are bitching constantly. But what else is new?
Yeah, well, they never stop whining. But I mean, in this game, it felt like Napoli, and this is one of the things that might cost Napoli, is that they were very defensive. Like you said, they're not really. They had 4 shots in this game. Now they still put up, I think, about 1 xG, which is very funny.
Well, McTominay scored a goal basically almost on the goal line off of a corner scramble. That was the bulk of their attacking output for this game, and probably for McTominay's last 3 seasons in Manchester United. But yeah, if you're you got to attack once in a while. Like you have to. It's how variation works inside of stats and football. As much as we love to think of it as humans exhibiting these amazing features and presences on the pitch, like at some point you got to take enough shots that have high probabilities to go in, and then score those shots, and then move up the league table. That's how it works. If Napoli are not doing that in every big game, then they can't come out the other side of this. And I'm not rooting for or against them. Like, as I said, I think Conte is really good. I just look at this and say, this is such a tight race. And if Inter are able to dominate like that against Napoli, like they probably will end up sort of pushing ahead at the end if this is like the consistent output. Juve have a great expected goal difference. They just aren't scoring enough goals. And can Mota turn that around? Kim appreciated Juve's transfer window in the summertime. We thought they didn't do such a bad job building for the present, but also the future there. So they can attack. The question for me is like, do they have another gear tactically to allow them to take that over? But nevertheless, like these are pretty fun matches. And especially if Napoli are not one of the ones involved, like I've enjoyed catching the glimpses and bits and bytes along with following the Championship and the Premier League and the Champions League the entire season.
Yeah, I think if you're interested in coaching, like it's a particularly fun watch right now. These teams are trying to outthink each other in different games. In this game, Inter really dialed up the press. You've also got Conte, who is still and will until the end of his career be seen as a 3-4-3 manager by British football watchers, playing a 4-3-3 with Napoli, and kind of like a box midfield where he gets McTominay running in ahead of the forwards. There's all sorts of super interesting stuff going on. It's not just Gasperini anymore, because it used to be, of course, that like Gasperini was like the one island of hope in the sea of mediocrity that was Serie A. But I don't know. Right now, I think it would be incredibly difficult to predict what's going to happen in this league. And my idea with Juventus is kind of the just so story that Kim has been telling, which is the idea here. We get the defense under control, we get this functioning, we have a solid base, and then we start adding a slightly more interesting, complex attacking system on top of it. Whereas I look at some of these other sides and I think, okay, Lazio are flying, Fiorentina are flying, Napoli have been kind of finishing at a high rate. I don't think these, how much of this is going to last is the question.
I'm still flashing back to Victor Moses as a wingback, but I'm trying to catch up the conversation now. No, I think that when I look at this, if I had to root for 2 teams, I'm excited about Atalanta and Fiorentina because it feels like they haven't been around that for a while. Inter's a little bit boring. Milan have the AC side of Milan have like this really weird story this year where like Zlatan is overseeing a lot of stuff. And then there's like the ultras that are frustrated about things. Roma have plummeted and are almost no longer sort of sensibly run, it feels like, which is a little weird. I don't know how that's going. So if you're looking for sort of Cinderella stories, like Fiorentina is the Cinderella and Atalanta are sort of the fun hipster one that finally feel like they deserve to win a title. Yeah. Napoli is like the Darth Vader coming back into the league again after he won like 1 billion titles at Juventus, who we hate because they're the evil empire. So like, don't root for them. And then you get Inter, where it's like, yeah, they have the huge budget and they've won recently. So like, that's no fun either. Lazio are the slightly fascist outsiders. I think that, if you were looking for current trends, like maybe you need to be a Lazio fan just to fit in with everything else that's happening in the world.
I'm not sure that the fascists are ever entirely outsiders in Italy, but I take your point. And Roma, who knows? Like the rumors about Roma are, on the one hand, maybe Frank Lampard is the front runner for the management job. On the other hand, maybe it's Roberto Mancini. And I thought it'd actually be hard to think of two unemployed managers of whom I have a more diverging opinions than those two coaches.
I like Mancio. I think he's done awesome work at a variety of places. I don't feel like he needs to work anymore, though. I feel like he feels like the type of man who should just be tan and beautiful on a beach somewhere. He's made his money. He's got his reputation. Like, he's won titles. Like, well done to that man. Frank Lampard probably also deserves to be on a beach for entirely different reasons.
It's a good one. Okay. Right. So I think that kind of look, we're going to have to go back to Serie A a lot this season because it feels like every week there's a different, change in the running, the leadership order. Is there anything else that you want to hit before we say goodbye today?
Just want to note as a sort of nice little thing for two different teams to take into the break. First one is Newcastle were dominant at a Forest team that has been very, very good this year. 17 shots at Forest, 3 goals. One of them felt a little bit lucky, but the other ones were all right. Don't let Joelinton shoot from the edge of the box with like all the space and time in the world. I think that's a lesson for the rest of the teams in the league. But we had talked many times on this podcast about how Newcastle were roughing it and they weren't as good as their metrics. And then over the last sort of 3-4 weeks, they've had some very good, metrics-based, but also results-based, outcomes. So Magpies fans should take some positive energy into the break. But the fans that are absolutely existing on vibes, and you and I give them a hard time, but like, you guys should just enjoy this because it's been pretty barren starvation level rations for a long time in positive vibes, is Manchester United. You guys have a fabulous manager that like kicked your main rivals in the teeth, walks out of his last game from like a huge successful last game at Sporting going into the international break. And he's coming to your team and he seems like everybody thinks he's awesome and he's going to do fabulous. And that's great. And you may get punched in the mouth a few times as soon as he steps in the Premier League because he doesn't have a team that's ready built to the style that he plays. And it's a little bit scruffy. But it's been such a long time that I felt like you and I know this will be hard for you, you and I should wish Manchester United fans just enjoy this wonderful break where you're going into it on a high because it might not last.
I refuse to co-sign. No, look, I think that being a Manchester United fan, the temptation is always with this kind of stuff to say, hey, everybody else is crap. Like, maybe if we win 3 or 4 games, we'll be in a title race. That's always the way it goes. No, don't think that way. Think that you've got a great manager. Your recruitment seems to have become less moronic lately. And a few more years of that with your revenue should actually put you in a pretty good position, especially with some regime change at Manchester City and, turnover in Liverpool as well coming down the line. It's an interesting time to be a United fan.
15 years in the wilderness is good for the rest of us who had to live through the Fergie era over and over again.
I hated it so much. It was traumatic for most of us. But I think that's an interesting point as well, because we hopefully over the next few weeks, we're going to start digging into some players, digging into teams. And I think it'd be really interesting to look how some players might change when Amorim comes in. I was thinking maybe we could take a look at Garnacho and how he's developing. He's one of their most interesting players. So if you guys have any suggestions for who we could cover, which players you would like to see us look at, their strengths, their weaknesses, and their kind of development trajectory, then do let us know in the comments here, or you can tweet at us. If you are watching this on YouTube, please also like and subscribe if you've enjoyed this video. If you're listening to it on a podcast app, then leave us a 5-star review, preferably 5 stars. If you have to leave 4 stars, then, whatever. You're dead to us. But everything else, head to the Transfer Flow, sign up for the newsletter. You'll get some great insight into players, teams, coaches, everything as we run up to the January transfer window. It's already coming at us, Ted.
I think we might even have some coach changes coming by the next time that we have this. And if we don't, then those boards are doing really dumb shit because some people needed to be fired.
Oh, Teflon Martin. He's still there, Ted. He's still there. Every international break until the end of time.
I'm not a Saints fan, so it doesn't bother me. I'm just kind of confused by it.
I mean, it is confounding. Thank you very much for listening or watching. We really do appreciate your support, and we will catch you next time. Bye-bye.
Peace.